Thank you for the introduction. I didn't greater than what it is actually, but and thank you Economic Times for giving me this opportunity to address all of you. So going with the theme of the conference for the session today, I noticed when we were discussing that there were four main themes: resilience, how do you make sure that you have uptime; elasticity, how do you make sure that the data center is scalable and flexible, and how do you make sure you can meet customer demands; secure, at the same time it needs to be secure given the mission critical nature of applications that are hosted in data centers; and how is it efficient. We had the previous panel talking about energy efficiency, so I'll also touch upon a few things that we do in this data center. So just to contrast some of what you've heard, I will be speaking more from a third-party data center provider's perspective, as opposed to a captive, enterprise data center that you see. There will be things in common, but there may be some differences as well. I won't spend too much time on this slide because I think the keynote speaker this morning, spent a lot of time also talking about how data is exploding. I think all of you know that. Just one statistic that over 150 billion will be invested in data centers by 2016, and cloud adoption is not only happening worldwide, but it is absolutely a reality. It's our fastest growing revenue stream, growing at over triple digits year on year for the last 3 years. So mission critical workloads are moving to cloud. So when we talk about next generation data centers, at the two main facets that I look at are uptime and security, right? We want data centers also to be energy efficient. We also want data centers to be elastic, but it cannot be at the cost of uptime and security, right? Some of the challenges, what happens is when you introduce new technologies like cloud, there's customer perception on security. When you introduce new technologies, even for cooling, is it properly supported in India, for example, that you can maintain the uptime? Will you have proper service on it? When we launched our cloud, we had a lot of interoperability issues between different manufacturers. So I would say of these four pillars, the two most critical, the way I look at, is uptime, which is where we talk about resiliency. That's why it's in the center, and security. I mean, these two things, if you get a little bit of less energy efficiency, it's not the end of the world. But if your uptime is down, if your data center is down, then customers are upset. So the trick is, how do you marry these four, right? So how do you make sure that the data center is resilient, it is secure, and at the same time, you make sure that you can pass on the benefit of energy efficiency to the customer by improving your PUE, so makes it more affordable. And how do you make it elastic so that you can, today we talked. I think the keynote speaker talked about e-commerce and mobile commerce. I think roughly 3/4 of India's e-commerce runs through our data centers, and the kind of demands that internet-centric e-commerce companies have is very, very different from the enterprise customers that we face. Both are equally mission critical. One could argue that both are equally mission critical, but the code releases that you see, the number of changes in code that you see, almost every day there is a new release that they come up with, internet-centric mission critical e-commerce customers, and the deployments, the auto scale features on cloud and things like that, they use it to the maximum, right? And so the data center also has to be elastic, and you need to have all of these, right? If you don't have all of these, then you will not be able to, a service provider like us will not be able to survive. You absolutely need all. But again, just to distinguish, elasticity and energy efficiency cannot come at the cost of availability and security. I mean, that's my perspective. So the trends, as you know, are e-commerce, mobility, Internet of Things. All that is leading to unpredictable workloads, dense workloads. Just talking about density, the data center density. I mean, we were designing data centers till recently of 4 to 6 kilowatts per rack. Now we are seeing on regularly customers coming asking for 12 kilowatts and above per rack, right? And this is real. I mean, we actually have workloads now running at those those energy densities. There's obviously a lot of data, and obviously there's the number of attacks that you see. When we started this business in 2000, we would have a denial of service attack or some kind of a major impact attack maybe once in 2 or 3 years. Now we see one every day, at least one every day, major attack. Of course, there are a lot more sophisticated tools to quell those attacks, but you have to constantly be on your toes, and security is obviously of paramount importance. So I'll take each of the 4 pillars, and I'm just mentioning a few points. There are a lot more than what I've put in the slide. I won't be able to cover everything in 15 minutes, but I'll be happy to have questions if anybody has on anything that I've not covered. So the first thing is human error, right? I put that right on top because you can have the best data center, you can have the most, you can have a tier 4 plus or whatever. You can. I don't pay much importance to tiering, but you can have the most resilient data center. You can have everything possible, but end of the day, there are humans. And while people did talk about lights out operation, it's not completely out there yet. You still need human beings to run data centers, and human errors can cause downtimes. I mean, we've had, in 15 years, we've hardly had any downtime, but whenever we've had, it's always been human error, more often than not, right? So lot of emphasis on process and training, and that's one of the key things that we do to make sure that we minimize human error. Obviously, automation plays somebody in the previous panel talked about automation, right? And will that result in loss of jobs? I think for me, automation, yes, it makes me more efficient, it makes us more efficient, we can pass on the benefit to customers, but more importantly, it reduces human error, right? The more automation you have, the lesser chances of human error. And of course, there's a lot of process and training, because you can't, I don't think anywhere, at least in India, we are nowhere at the stage where we can get rid of people and have completely lights out operation. That's not practical yet. So may get there in the future, but as of now, it's not the case. And so there's a lot of emphasis on people manning the data centers, both from a infrastructure facility side as well as from the IT side. That's very, very important. Power availability, you hear of various designs, not only having multiple power sources, having multiple generators. You have different people talk about designs like n plus n UPSs or n plus 1. One of the world's largest data centers companies, Equinix, most of the data centers are designed on n plus 1, right? But there are also, I've talked to certain mission critical banks where they want 2n plus 1, because they say even if you're doing maintenance, we cannot have for let's say you're doing a 6-hour maintenance on a UPS, you cannot have the entire load running on a single UPS, right? Or you need resiliency even then. So that's one aspect of it. There are a lot of other things. Again, the human angle comes very important there. But availability is not only in terms of power; it's also in terms of cooling. I'm not mentioning all of that in the slide, but even the cooling systems, you cannot have. You need complete resiliency even on cooling, not only from a chiller perspective, but also from the piping and on the walls and everything that you have in the entire cooling infrastructure. Everything needs to be resilient, redundant, and it needs to be, even during maintenance, there cannot be a downtime, right? That's the mission critical world that we live in today. By and large, I think India has reached a stage where most top data center providers have, to a large extent, achieved this. But still, this is one of the key areas, and the technology is only enabling us to make this more automated, so that we prevent human error even on these issues. Geographic location is also very important, not only from a seismic zone perspective, but also from various other issues. Site selection. When we spend almost 6 months in selecting a site for a data center. So when we build a data center, it has to be, not only from a seismic perspective, but from flooding perspective, from riot-prone areas perspective, etc. I mean, there are a lot. There should not be any polluting element nearby. Air quality perspective, the ability to store enough diesel and fuel. So site selection also plays a very key role, which adds to your, how resilient the data center can be. Building structure. I think most people know here that you cannot have with the kind of density that we are seeing, whether it's because of cloud or because of new kind of computing equipment that we are seeing, the floor loading, the structure of the building becomes very important, right? Again, to maintain, this is another feature for maintaining resiliency. I already talked about cooling from a redundancy perspective, but cooling from a rack density, right? We have a very envious job. We have a problem where we don't know at the beginning when we're designing the data center. Product managers that are responsible for a data center co-location product often worry, right, that do we design only a high density load, because then as the previous panel said, you're wasting a lot of resources, because if you don't have customers consuming that high density load, how do you've invested so much money, your power usage efficiency goes for a toss, but at the same time, so how do you manage different customers' requirements? There's some customers who may need low density, like typical network racks don't require as much density, but a cloud service provider hosted in our co-load in our data center requires 12 kilowatts per rack. So the design needs to be flexible to be able to accommodate all this. We have, in some cases we've done different zones where we have different zones for high density, medium density, and low density. And in some cases we just have a flexible design where we can accommodate mid to high density in the same server hall, and this is constantly evolving. We do a lot of CFD analysis. It's not enough to just have air conditioning, you need to have airflow, and so we do CFD analysis simulation before we build, and also do it regularly to make sure that we eliminate any potential hotspots. Another very important thing is thermal inertia, which data center service providers sometimes neglect, and that is, when you lose power, even when you go on generator, your chillers are not backed by UPS, right? So the load that you will have, especially, and this becomes even more important in high density workloads. See, most data centers that you saw till recently were not high density data centers, and so this was not such an important issue. But today, when you have this 12 kilowatt plus 18 kilowatt, 12 kilowatt loads, if the power goes, even if you have generators kicking in, your chiller will take a finite time to start, right? And so you need to have enough buffer capacity, or long enough pipes, or some buffer tank, or some capability by which you can, the chilled water can continue, cooling the servers in that 2 or 3 minutes that it takes. I mean, people have designed chillers which come on faster. People have figured it by using enough tank, but that very often it's not even considered. And so you have an old data center design where this is not an issue because the density is low, but suddenly you now have a high density workload coming in that data center, and then this suddenly becomes an issue. So these are the kind of things that we grapple with. And of course, all future data centers, in terms of next generation data centers, these are a given. Without this, no large customer would ever sign up. And of course, connectivity. Our approach has been to be carrier neutral and have presence of all the major carriers, whether it's Tata Communications, Airtel, Reliance, MTNL, BSNL, everybody present in our data centers, and give the customer the choice of which service provider they can use. Just to add, there's a question in the last panel where I think the gentleman from Future Group said that, why don't data center service providers give us an SLA, end-to-end SLA, right? And I think data center service providers would like to. The question is of control, and the question is also of how much investment has gone from the customer side from a redundancy perspective. So, from an example, data center provider like us would give SLA on the connectivity at the data center, but if there's a branch office of the customer which has a single BSNL link and that goes down, there's no way in hell a data center provider can give that SLA. Unless the customer himself plans it out and has redundant links to all his branches. And so, my take is that if a data center provider actually commits, he's actually committing a fraud, because there's no way on earth that he can do it unless there is proper planning done along with the customer and make sure that we have enough resiliency everywhere. I'll now touch upon elastic data centers, and this entire, I mentioned in the beginning that cloud is a reality, infrastructure as a service is absolutely a reality, and I mean, most of you are already using cloud today. A lot of customers started with using cloud in the West. A lot of customers started using cloud more for test and dev environments initially, and then moved mission critical workloads. India, I think, because it started a little later, and the sheer benefits of cloud and learning from the West, where people had already started putting the mission critical workloads on cloud, India actually started with more mission critical workloads right up front, right? So today we have, you know, not only internet centric companies using cloud, but also large enterprises, including ERP applications, etc., running on cloud. And you know, there's no question that is you know, a growing trend from now on. But just to give you know, just to give context on the slide, traditional designs were more, from an IT perspective in a data center, were more, you had discrete components. You had separate components for network, storage, you know, compute, and basically you had separate firewalls, load balancers, etc. With cloud, with the way data center, elastic data center technology is evolving, you now have a pool of resources that can be used the way you like, right? And those can be all software defined. So you already have, we already have, for example, not only software defined compute, but also software defined storage today already live. And you know, as Professor Belur mentioned, he's doing a lot of research on software defined network. We at Entity we also have, I think, 12 countries on a software defined network, but it's still, the technology is still maturing before it becomes useful to end customers. But there are certain applications like disaster recovery, etc., that we are doing cross continents using software defined network. But end of the day, everything is a pool of resources, and you know, you can provision on the fly and scale up, scale down, auto scale, turn up resources, turn down resources, all through software. Whether it's on storage, you can have multiple tiers of storage, whether you want SAS, flash, or you know, SSDs, whatever you want, you can provision that on the fly. And you can also guarantee, even though you have a multi-tenanted environment, you can guarantee IOPS, right, using software-defined storage. So that's again, this is something that we are seeing a trend. I'm not saying that the traditional way of computing is gone, right, but this is what the trend is emerging, and this is where more and more customers are putting future workloads on. So I get often asked this question: does it mean that all the old style of computing is gone? I don't think that's true. We still see a lot of customers co-locating you know, physical servers with us. They may do their virtualization themselves. Not everything is moving to service providers like us on cloud, and of course there are also you know, not everything is Intel based. Most of the cloud that we are talking about is Intel based architectures. There are a lot of other, you know, IBM P series and a lot of other you know, HP UX and other operating systems and flavors where they have their own method of virtualization, which not a third party provider like us or Amazon, for example, cannot offer until the applications move to open architectures, right? Some of that will continue to remain discrete. Addressing security, I think there are two aspects of security when you talk about data centers. One is the physical aspect. So how secure is the data center from a physical perspective? There are multiple layers, you know, right from you know, palm geometry readers before you enter the hall to multiple guards and you know, vehicle scanners, boom barriers, you know, the lot. You know, you have perimeter cameras, you have cameras outside the campus, you know, covering the entire campus, etc. So that, I think, most of you have seen, and even in their own enterprise data centers, these are prevalent. But I'd like to focus more on the logical aspect, which is, you know, as these workloads are exposed to the internet, right, or to the external networks, what are the various ways that people can attack? I think, again, some of the panelists spoke about that in the previous session. I mentioned also that the number of attacks that we see now are very, very frequent. Denial of service, for example, right? We started seeing attacks of magnitude greater than 10 gigs per second on a single customer, right? You know, there was a time about a year, about 10, 11 months back, when a lot of these e-commerce companies were announcing full-page ads on newspapers saying they got, I mean, it's still happening, $1 billion funding, or so much valuation, so much funding, and the next day some hacker would come and target that company for DDoS attacks. And not only that, there are a lot of other kinds of attacks that we see. I mean, there's vulnerabilities in application, common attacks like SQL injection and cross-site scripting. All these attacks are very, very prevalent. They happen on a daily basis across the world, right? And so there are multiple, I mean, and I also agree with the speaker who said that there's nothing called 100% security. But you take the best practices, you follow what is available so that you can minimize the impact of a potential attack. There are day zero attacks where you have a vulnerability before it is discovered by the vendor, right, of software. End of the day, software will have bugs. However well it's written, there will be some bugs, and there will be some attacker who will exploit that bug, and we see this happening more and more. So there are a number of methods that are used. I mean, DDoS prevention mechanisms, and that these methods are either in the cloud, so you can have a DDoS service that you can subscribe to. So for greater than 10 gig attacks, we've actually subscribed to a service for our customers, where the traffic goes to a scrubbing farm. The bad traffic gets thrown out of the scrubbing farm, and then the good traffic only comes to us. Because if that traffic had reached our data center, it would have choked our upstream pipes, and even if I scrubbed it when it came to me, it was too late, right? The upstream capacity is all choked. Of course, these are expensive solutions, so not all customers subscribe for it, but technology does exist, right? Then of course at the perimeter, so we do have protection at the perimeter, and sometimes you have protection right at the customer rack itself, so inside the data center as well. Talking about energy efficiency and green data centers, of course, this is one thing where you can be good to the environment and save money for you as well as for the customer at the same time, so it's a no-brainer. Again, my only caution here is, while there is a lot of new technology on this, a lot of it that is not tried and tested, or is not necessarily something that you can just deploy from the West to India. For example, now that we are part of NTT acquired this company called Gyron in the UK, which runs data centers at a PUE of 1.2, right? It's an amazing, between 1.2 and 1.3, and they use the free cooling, where they use the ambient temperature. They're in a cold climate, and they use the ambient temperature to reduce the AC load. But that will not work in a climate like Bombay, right, where temperatures touch 40 degrees plus in summer, right? That's just no way you can use complete free cooling in Bombay. So you need also some of these technologies that you see that people have deployed, they need to be properly supported in a mission critical manner in India. So we are constantly looking for those kind of solutions, and we have made any next generation data center will have to look at aggressive PUEs. I think in India it's still more in the range of around 1.4 to 1.6 or so is the best that we've seen in the Indian environment, depending on whether you use water-based water chillers, air chillers, or DX units. All that makes a difference as to what efficiency you can get. So obviously the impact, right from the old hot aisle, cold aisle containment philosophy to looking at more efficient cooling machines, to looking at more efficient chillers, to looking at more efficient servers. I think the gentleman from Lenovo mentioned about 96% efficiency on servers. So all those go in making sure that for every dollar that you spend, you're not wasting another dollar on work that is not useful. Another very key thing, a lot of customers, when we respond to RFPs for customers, they ask you for 22 plus or minus 1 or 2 degrees for temperature to for return air temperature. And as this was true maybe 10 years back or 7 years back, now you don't need to run at 22 degrees. ASHRAE standards actually allow you to run much higher temperatures. I think we've touched 24, people go up to 26. for return, and I think it will soon go even higher than that. But sometimes you have a dilemma in that where the customer insists in the RFP that you have to run it at 22 degrees, and it becomes very difficult to handle that, and you may have to do something specific for that area, even if at the cost of efficiency, if you just want to satisfy the customer requirement. But next generation data centers are not going to run at 22 degrees. They're going to run at much higher temperatures. Of course, it's very important to also know where this is measured, but I'll leave it at that for the time being, that you can run the data centers at, and just by changing the temperature from 22 to 24 or 25 results in a huge efficiency. There are other technologies that were discussed earlier, where you use digital scrolls, or you shut off compressors that are not being used within the cooling machine, and there are multiple ways of doing that. We have adopted some of that, and it's going to be a given in the next. First, you have to use external tools to do that. Now, it is inbuilt in the air conditioning machines that you buy, and so all these result in better cooling, better PUEs, and of course, the facility itself. When you're building the building itself, we try to go for LEED certification in all our facilities, and this is going to become prevalent. It may even become mandatory in the future. I think once the government wakes up to the fact that, as Professor Belur mentioned, 4% of US energy needs are being used by data centers very soon, just like you had norms for vehicles, where you had to have certain pollution-free norms. They might have energy efficiency norms coming in. As service providers, we have to report the carbon footprint every year to the government, and very soon there will be norms which will force us to have green buildings. So just the key, this is my last slide. I'll summarize and then happy to answer any questions. The four key foundations that we discussed were resiliency and security. I put that first because that is paramount, and then of course elasticity and efficiency, which would help in meeting the diverse requirements of customers. I think next generation data center providers are best equipped to handle these needs. Yes, customers can do this themselves. I'm not saying it's not possible, but when a service provider has the benefit of scale, right, which the economies of scale that a service provider enjoys can be passed on to the customer, and that's their core focus. I think it's better that most mission critical customers that we see now focus on their core business applications and leave the infrastructure to next generation data center providers. And the elasticity, especially, and the automation that you introduced in data centers give you the flexibility and scalability that you see in today's workloads, IT workloads. So with that, I'd like to end this, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, sir. May I request them to contact you offline at this hall? Thank you so much. May I please request Rajesh, a beautiful presentation. Thank you, sir, for sharing your experience with us, because this is the moment that we've been waiting for. May I please request Mr. Kupchandani from Times Conferences Limited, Project Head ETH, to honor Mrs. Sanghi with a small memento. Once again, thank you, Mr. Sanghi, for that wonderful presentation. We really didn't know how time flew.